Good evening and welcome to Juxtaposition. I'm Reverend Mark Hughes and I'm your host, the Executive Director of Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. Joining you today, I think on probably one of the warmest days since last fall, I think it is. If not, it's definitely going to be tomorrow. So broadcasting here from Burlington and just talking about not your normal emergency, talking a little bit about emergencies today. We've heard a lot about the public health emergencies, racism being public health emergencies. Also, obviously, the COVID-19. There's been national emergencies, statewide emergencies, and I just want to see if we can pull some of that together. I picked up a copy of the Burlington Community newspaper, and I saw an article in here, and I thought I'd share it with you to start. It says, this is Governor Phil Scott on civility and respect. This kind of caught my attention, and I figured I'd share it with you today. It says, at his weekly press conference, Scott addressed concerning incidents seen at youth sporting events over the past several months, and the need for everyone to work to be better models. Scott said, he said, "Good afternoon. I want to start today by addressing some concerning incidents we've seen over the past few months at youth sporting events, from spectators in the stands using racial slurs at players of color to the tragic violence in Alburg recently. Now I understand the passion surrounding sports, but it's clear we have a problem. And we should not tolerate the hate. And it's not just at these events or sporting events in general or unique to Vermont. I believe it's a symptom of a much deeper problem where there's far too much anger, a lack of respect in our society. We're constantly being divided into camps, whether it's politics, religion, race, social issues. Everything has turned into a us versus them. Too many want to stoke fear, raise the temperature, which can sometimes lead to violence. We see politicians convince their supporters that the other side is the enemy, and some of the national media choose to ramp up conflicts to get more views, sell more papers, or increase their ratings." And he goes on. And this is an April 7th read of Burlington's community newspaper, North End News. I just wanted to share that with you. Pick up a copy. Thanks for that, Phil. Those are some good and encouraging words. I'm back from Montpelier. I took a trip to Montpelier today down to the State House, and I promised a legislator this book. This is The Sum of Us by Heather McGee. And a question came up in committee. If we're talking about health equity, for Black and brown folks, or say the LGBTQIA community, or the communities of disabilities, what about the poor communities? And often I hear that, what about? There's always a what about? What about women? What about? And immediately what it does is it creates a us versus them, as Phil was just saying, and it also creates a false narrative of scarcity, and it creates the supposition that if one group that is somehow or another marginalized, if they're given more, then that would have to be at the expense of another, which is just false. And I think another thing to remember too is the fact that, often when we do create exclusions, say, for example, as we did with Act 250 in 1968 and 1969, 1970 timeframe, what ends up happening is it actually boomerangs. And what we saw is that policy it did in fact create scarcity, and it diminished the availability of viable housing, in which also suppressed our economic market, because without housing, there's no people. Something for you. Heather McGee, The Sum of Us, take a look at that. You may want to check it out. Check this slide out. There's a, this is old Joe, and he's speaking during a meeting with President, his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology in the State Dining Room at the White House on the 4th of April, and he's talking about the national emergency to respond to COVID-19 pandemic ending. You may have not gotten the memo, thank you for that slide, but it actually ended 2 days ago. The national emergency on this COVID-19 quietly ended day before yesterday, just so you know. So, and it kind of gives me, a good hopping off point and something to talk about, because, we've talked a lot about this whole idea of, hey, this racism is a public health emergency. We've gotten these other, health emergencies. Obviously, the health emergency that was called here in Burlington, the one that was called at the statewide level and federal, what it did was it invoked various levers to enable elected and appointed officials to activate resources and to actually to care for people. And what we saw as a result of that is a couple things. As a result of the emergencies, number one is we saw that clearly that there was a laying bare of the inequities that always existed before the actual pandemic. But we did see, when you take the pandemic and you multiply it times George Floyd, we saw very clearly, at least on the racial front, how clear it was to us as we looked at Black and brown families largely in multi-generational homes, and also Black and brown folks getting sick and dying at largely disproportionate rates. We saw so much with essential workers in having to come out and literally put their lives on the lines. And what we saw is we saw outbreaks resulting from just poor policy, because what we discovered is when those of us who are most vulnerable become sick, then that jeopardizes all of us, and we all can become sick. And we saw that time and time and time again. And I refer to that as the boomerang effect. So we definitely saw those things happening. Here, listen to this. This is over in Digger. It says, President Biden announced that the federal government plans to end the emergency declaration for COVID on May 11th. He said he was going to do it on May 11th. A move that could affect Vermonters' ability to access vaccinations, testing, treatment, and for the disease. It sounds eerily familiar too, because the truth is that when the pandemic first started, there was a challenge as far as testing was concerned, getting testing in Black neighborhoods. There was a challenge getting, I think there were testing out in Essex, but there was none in the Old North End. There was none in Winooski. And those are exactly the places in our Black and brown neighborhoods where we got those outbreaks. We were seeking to try to get vaccinations to Black and brown folks as early in the game as possible. That was an uphill battle. And much of everybody's stuck on ARPA. Many have forgotten CARES, but the CARES Act money came and went, and hardly any of it made it into Black and brown communities. And it was only after the ARPA funds came where we started trying to figure out how to effectuate change in a better way. But so many problems. And what we saw is it was not just intentions alone. What we were dealing with is a system that was functioning perfectly, exactly how it was designed, and that is in a society where there is a narrative of white supremacy. What we see is the system serve white and affluent people in a much better fashion. So what we saw is disparities, and we still see those. Questions are, what did we do? What did we learn, and what did we do? Well, what we learned from let's just say the Great Recession, with the housing crash back in 2008 and 2009 what we saw is we saw more wealth, more Black folks lose their homes as a result of that bust than you can shake a stick at. There was a massive loss of Black wealth in America as a result of that. And what we learned is these subprime loans that they were targeting These were targeted loans, and hopefully we pick something up from that. I'm not quite sure what we've learned from this so far, or what we've changed, I guess is another question. This is from Roll Call from Sandhya Raman, Lauren Clayson, and Jesse Hellman, and Ariel Cohen. It's from a Roll Call article. It says the U.S. still plans to end the emergencies. They stand in contrast to the opinions of other global health leaders, with World Health Organization Director, this is General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, on Monday. He says that the pandemic is nearing a transition point, and he aligned himself with the WHO committee that said it requires a focused commitment of the WHO, its members, and state and international organizations, and that long-term public health action is critically needed. Quote, he's saying, we are seeing massive amounts of sicknesses right now, and there's no reason to believe, I hope that it's otherwise, that this is going to change. That was Bernie Sanders, a quote there. So we're seeing that the Moderna prices are going to go up. They're going to shoot through the roof. I'm not trying to discourage you or anything like that, but it's important to understand that we started this journey somewhere around the beginning of January in 2020, and we saw it coming. We were dealing with a system that wasn't prepared for it. It hit us. We saw the disparities that existed in it. We've sought to backstop some of the things that we're doing about it, but have we really changed any of the systems significantly is the question. The question is have we really effectuated change to the extent that if something like this were to happen again, or if something similar were to happen, would we see different outcomes? Moreover, are we still not continuing to see, as we lose more people who died in 9/11 on a weekly basis, because it's not over yet, and people are still dying? Are we still experiencing disproportionate impacts in our Black and brown communities? And having not seen any significant change structurally, we can only surmise that that's just not happening. And we've got the data. The data supports it. So lots of stuff happening. And I think what we're forgetting. Check this slide out. What we're forgetting is that we've started the work. In addition to the joint resolution declaring racism as a public health emergency, not your real emergency, but it's a public health emergency. What we resolved was, the legislature resolved, watch this, look at this slide closely. It says that the body commits to the sustained and deep work of eradicating systemic racism throughout the state, actively fighting racist practices and participating in the creation of more just and equitable systems. It commits to coordinating work and participating in the ongoing action grounded in science and so forth. Now, as you continue to watch, we talked about the fact that systemic racism, this is a complex array of black, anti-black practices and unjustly gained political economic power of whites and continuing economic and other resources inequalities along racial lines. It's the emotion-laden racist framing created by whites to maintain and rationalize their privilege and power. So if it exists anywhere, it exists everywhere. And I guess what we're looking at, thanks for that slide, is that as we continue this work, we're going to continue to drive some of the policies. We're also going to continue to do the work in communities. You should know that one of the policies that we're supportive of, that we continue to support, is actually the Land Access Opportunity Board, because this is where we can establish wealth in Black and brown communities by ownership of land and property to be able to begin to build generational wealth. Back to those slides again. One of the things that we discovered in our discussions over this last couple of years is that the median wealth of a Black family is about 1/13 that, or 1/10 that in this slide, of a white family, depending on which one of these you're looking at, whether it's durable goods or without durable goods. I'm going to say that once again, just for effect, is that the median wealth of a black family is about 1/10 to 1/13 that of a white family. Now, thank you. You can't fix that in 5 honest lifetimes of work. So we got to do a lot of things at the same time in order to close that gap. So what we've come to understand is that when we're talking about racism being a public health emergency, when we're talking about eradicating systemic racism, what we're talking about is the fact that across housing, education, employment, health services, economic development, transportation, all of these systems, we know that quantitatively and empirically, we're seeing data that's being produced that racially disparate outcomes that are adverse are occurring simultaneously and insidiously across all these systems. So we know it's a very complicated issue. It's a very complicated challenge. And what we're seeking to do is to implement solutions wherein we can address all of these systems. And one of them, which leads me back to the reason why I was in Montpelier today, is the Health Equity Advisory Commission. The Health Equity Advisory Commission came from a community effort. It came as a result of the wellness working group of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance sought to implement some type of policy to address some change during this emergency. What we did is we suggested that there would be an Office of Health Equity within state government. And that Office of Health Equity would have a whole of government approach. And that whole of government approach would have responsibility for policy, consistent, fair, impartial, policy that's impactful, that's non-biased across all of these agencies. Also training, also data collection, hiring and appointment processes, and so forth. So it must be whole of government. It also must be uniform. So we weren't able to get that moving forward last biennium, but what we were able to do was to at least get the legislature to see that this was an initiative worth analysis. So they did decide to allow us to move forward with a Health Equity Advisory Commission. And that commission has been at work for about the last 18 months. And one of the charges of this commission was to, in fact, stand up this Office of Health Equity within state government. So, and again, this is a multifaceted responsibility that this commission has, because also distributing funding, grant funding, and also engaging community and so forth. So there's a lot to know, a lot to learn about, but I'd encourage you to go ahead, reach out to Senate or House, those healthcare committees, and you can just drop them a line and say, hey, we think this should be funded, because that hasn't necessarily been funded, at least as of yet. It wasn't funded in the governor's budget. It wasn't funded in the House's budget. So we definitely want to go back and take a look and see if we can get this thing at least over to the Senate and get some folks enthusiastic about it. So yeah, there's the U.S. national emergency to respond to COVID pandemic. It did end a couple days ago. It was somewhat abrupt. It did come over. There was a bill that started in the House. It did go through the Senate. It got bipartisan support on it. We thought we were watching this situation. We thought that Biden was going to hold off on it. He didn't. It came over to him. He signed the bill in a closed door session. And the truth is that it will have some impacts on some of the things that we're seeing and some of the things that we're doing right now. Again, more than 500 people are still dying of COVID every day in the United States. I think just quoting words that came out of the White House before this occurred, it said, an abrupt end to the emergency declaration will create wide-ranging chaos and uncertainty throughout the health system. Well, that's kind of exactly what they did. We're not quite sure why, but I could imagine that there was some political pressure on the administration to do so. I would say that, again, the vast majority of what we're talking about and what we're dealing with here, it has everything to do with wealth in America, as we were talking about again. And just a reminder, take a look at this slide. There's quite a bit to be said about what, where this wealth came from and how it was created. And what that means is we must invest in our communities. You take a look at some of these, what stands out is the 1862 Homestead Act, that 270 million acres that was distributed to white folks. But there's more and more, all types of reasons why wealth has been unequally distributed across the United States, and this white middle class was created. And I think we just have to come to terms with who we are and what we are as a nation, what we've created and what it causes. Because yes, at the end of the day, thank you for that slide, it does cause inequity. It causes inequity across, all types of systems, and it culminates in the health system. It culminates with people's health. It culminates where people are dying at disproportionate rates, where they don't have the quality of life. We know that this pandemic, it has caused a mental health crisis that is unprecedented. And what we know, just like this is happening in every other sector, Black people are being hit first, they're being hit worse, and the impacts are lasting longer. So as we get to the so-called end of this pandemic, as everybody rolls up the carpet and says, oh, we did a great job, and folks are out running victory laps, talking about how the pandemic is over, we did our job, the emergency is not here anymore. Know this, that there are Black and brown folks that are still out there that are struggling. And as that's happening, just like they felt the impact and the brunt of the impact when this first started, as all of these supplements are beginning to become withdrawn, who's going to get hurt hardest? It's going to be poor people. Yes, we could also say here in Vermont too, that our rural folks are going to be impacted as well. Because again, it's not just about Black folks. I'm here to tell you about Black folks because I'm the executive director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. But it doesn't create a false narrative. It doesn't create a narrative of scarcity to folks who are rural, to suggest that Black folks are being hurt, because folks who are rural are being hurt as well. So I think right now, the irony as well as the disappointment with what's going on is the fact that we're not done yet. We're really not done yet. Because think about it. What I just told you is we actually started during the pandemic, during the national crisis, during the national emergency, during the state emergency, and during this emergency that we call racism as a public health emergency, by resolution of the city council, declaration of the city and of Burlington and 30 other organizations, as well as a joint resolution bicameral in our legislature. While this was all going, we went to the legislature and asked them, hey, create an Office of Health Equity. That did not happen. Right now, we're still before the legislature, and can you believe it? At the time at which we are now saying that there's no longer an emergency, that we're sitting in committee trying to convince the legislature today, trying to convince them to give us $1.5 million to implement this office that we've been asking for since this entire pandemic started. Well, at least smack dab in the middle of it. So lots to be said there. I would, encourage you to, again, support this effort in the legislature. Reach out. I wanted to share with you, if you go back to this last slide I have for you, what it says is, and this is from the United Nations. It says that, hey, there's a profound need to acknowledge that the transatlantic trade in Africans, enslavement, colonization, colonialism were a crime against humanity and were among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, related intolerance, past injustices against African Americans. They need to be addressed with reparatory justice. So this is the work that we're doing across not just thank you for that slide, not just across health equity, but also economic equity, land and home access equity. What we're seeking to do is we're seeking to build better systems. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've got to be able to take what we have and piecemeal some of it together, bring all of the spokes in and get a hub to create some systems that are impactful, where we can actually manage these types of pandemics and moving forward. But more importantly, so everybody can live equitably, so we can live in a society, like Phil said, like I told you at the beginning, so we can be civil, so we can be respectful, and so we can all live together. Everybody can have everything that they need. Thanks for joining us today. Reverend Mark Hughes, Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and the chair of the Health Equity Advisory Commission. I'm glad to have you along with us today, talking here about what it takes to create a little equity, what it takes to take us all a little bit further, not your normal emergency racism. Good night.